this video, we are going to discuss how MEEs are graded and what you need to know. So first things first, you have to keep in mind your audience. Think about it like this. When you prepared to take exams back in law school, you were preparing to write an answer for your professor. And your professors might have all had differing approaches to their exam style or their writing style, or they might have had a preferred preference about how you were supposed to approach certain legal issues. Same thing for the bar exam. You want to keep in mind who is your audience. In other words, who is going to be responsible for grading your essays? And then of course you want to plan accordingly. So your bar exam grader is usually a practicing attorney or sometimes a judge. This is important because you just got out of law school, presumably. Or in the past, you were in law school where again, you practiced writing exams and taking tests for your professor. Your professors may have been very, impressed by policy-based discussions or references to weird cases that they covered in class. But here, again, situating yourself for your audience, this practicing attorney or this judge who's responsible for grading your MEE answer, they're not going to be impressed with some sort of policy-based discussion or weird case law references. This is because graders are often given a checklist. In other words, they have some sort of checklist that tells them everything that they're looking for in your answer. This is why some sort of policy-based discussion or weird case law reference isn't going to impress your MEE grader. Because again, they're only focused with whether or not your essay contains what that checklist says they're looking for. Additionally, graders are often paid per essay, and they're human. So the easier your essay is to grade, the better it is for you. If it's very obvious to them that you have the relevant information that their checklist says they're looking for, this means your essay is way more likely to be higher scoring. I always say the easier it is to read, the easier it is to grade, and that's going to give you that outcome you want, that higher score. So these graders, because they're usually paid per essay that they grade, there's this incentive for them to move quickly. And I'm not trying to insinuate that they are careless or negligent or that they, are trying to speed through things to make some money. But what I am saying is that they are human. So they are not likely to read or to reread or to reread an essay that they've already covered multiple times in an effort to see if your essay contains what their checklist is looking for. Your professor back in law school might have been motivated to do that, but here these graders don't have any incentive to do such a thing. So this means too that because your bar exam graders are often given many essays to grade, and there's this incentive to work rather quickly, they're going to start scanning essays. Again, this is not because they're negligent or have some sort of ill will. It's because they're human, and this is the parameters of the bar exam. So because they start to scan essays, we really want to make sure that your essay is very clearly competent. They're likely not going to read every single word of every single one of your essays. So again, the easier it is that your essay is to read, it's going to be easier to grade and more likely to be higher scoring. So let's talk about the scoring of your MEEs, now that you know who your grader is. So each jurisdiction has some autonomy. They can set their own grading scale. Most MEE jurisdictions use a 0 to 6 or a 1 to 6 grading scale. However, some use a 0 to 10 grading scale. And then you have jurisdictions like New York, for instance, that use a 20 to 80 point scale. So you should definitely check with your jurisdiction to see what type of grading scale they use, if this information is even publicly available. Similarly, each jurisdiction has the autonomy or the power to set their own grading policies or their regrade policies. So again, you want to be familiar with your specific jurisdiction's policies here. This way you're prepared and of course can plan accordingly. Remember, though, since you're taking the uniform bar examination, the MEEs were 30% of your overall bar exam score. So it's going to be added to your multi-state performance test, or MPT score, which is 20% of your total bar exam score. And then it is scaled in comparison to how other examinees performed on the test. So when we say it's scaled, essentially this is the jurisdiction's way of trying to make all bar exams fair across the administration. So for instance, if it was an easier bar examination, that's going to be reflected in the scale. If they feel like it was a harder bar exam administration than most, they're going to be adding points to people's bar exams to make them even across the administrations. So when it comes to grading rubrics, many people ask us if we can provide them with their state's grading rubric or grading policy. And the answer is not every single jurisdiction makes this information publicly available. And if you're looking for your state's information, go to your Board of Law Examiners website and see if you can find it there. That's a great first place to start. But what we've provided for you is a grading rubric that's been provided by the state of Washington. And we find it so helpful because, again, not every single jurisdiction makes this information available. So if you're looking for some sort of guidance on a scale, and because a lot of jurisdictions use this 0 to 6 point scale, it's really nice that Washington has this available for us. So again, we've provided it to you. And I'm not going to read it to you word for word, but I do want to touch upon some of kind of the hallmarks of these scores. So let's take it from the top with that high score of a 6. So here they're describing a 6 answer as a very good answer. In fact, this is the highest score they could give an essay. And they say that it indicates that the examinee has a thorough understanding of the facts, it recognizes all of the issues that are presented, those applicable principles of law, and it reasons to a conclusion. And they also describe this essay as being a well-written essay. Compare that to the score of a 5. They call this above average, and that it indicates a fairly complete understanding of the facts, recognizes most of the issues, those applicable principles of law. It also can reason to a conclusion, and it's relatively well written. Now compare that to a 4. They're still calling this an above average answer. And it indicates that the examinee has an understanding of the facts, it recognizes most of the issues and their applicable rules of law, and it reasons to a conclusion. And they describe this type of answer as satisfactorily written. Moving down our scale to the score of a 3, they call this a below average answer. They call this generally inadequate. Compare that to the score of a 2. They also call this below average, and again, they call this significantly flawed. Compare that to the score of a 1. They say this is among the worst answers. It shows virtually no ability to identify issues, reason, or right in a cognate manner. Finally, the score of a 0, it indicates that there was no response or was unresponsive to the question. As I'm going to discuss in a little bit of greater detail in a second, usually if you find yourself in a jurisdiction that uses a 0 to 6 scale, usually the score of a 3.9 to a 4.2 is passing. So again, we kind of want to stick to the middle portion of this grading rubric, and that is what we're shooting for. Now, if you find yourself in a jurisdiction like New York that has this kind of different grading scale, I mentioned before that they grade on a 20 to 80 point scale. There in this jurisdiction, they consider the score of a 50 to be passing or average. So if you're in New York, you're shooting for that score of a 50 or higher. So now that we've taken a little bit of a closer look at some grading rubrics, oftentimes people wonder, well, what do I need to pass? And I briefly referenced this a second ago, and this really truly depends upon which jurisdiction you're in and what is a passing UBE score in your jurisdiction. And we have this really nice handy dandy little chart. So if you find yourself in a jurisdiction where the score of a 260 is considered passing on the uniform bar exam, you're shooting to get the score of a 3.9 on your essays. If you're in a jurisdiction that requires the score of a 266, you're shooting for the score of a 4.0. And again, we're using that 0 to 6 point scale, by the way. Now, if you find yourself in a jurisdiction that requires a passing score of 270, 272, or 273, you're shooting for that average score of a 4.1. If you find yourself in a jurisdiction that considers a 274 or 276 to be passing, you're shooting for that 4.2. Finally, if you're in a jurisdiction that requires that 280, you as well need a 4.2 to be passing on average. Now, with that in mind, I do want to stress something. Remember that you do not technically need to get a passing score on the MEE to pass the Uniform Bar Examination. This means if you perform better, let's say on the MBE portion of your exam, as long as that overall score you receive from all components of the bar exam is considered passing in your jurisdiction, then you are good to go. So for instance, some people do really well on the written portion of their exam and they struggle a little bit with the MBE. That's okay. As long as their overall score passes in their jurisdiction, they've passed. Or if your situation is the reverse, if the written portion is harder for you and you do better on the multiple choice portion, then again, that higher multiple choice portion can bring up your overall score. The only thing that really matters is whether or not your overall score is considered passing. So we always suggest that you give due time and attention to each component of the Uniform Bar Examination. That is the best way to put yourself in the best position possible to be successful or to pass. So that is why we suggest that you strive for those passing scores on your essays. This way, you're not putting too much pressure or weight on any one component of your exam, but again, overall, all of the pieces of the puzzle can work together to get you that overall passing score that you need to be successful.